Episode number 33. Welcome back. This is the Expected Returns Podcast. My name is Stephen Lutman. I'm a real estate investor and agent here in the capital region of New York State. A lot of ground for us to cover today. However, before we do, just a quick word that if you're somewhat newer to real estate or perhaps you're interested in buying your first investment property, I did put out a 30-minute explainer video analyzing markets, exploring different rental property opportunities, grant programs. You can find a link to it in today's show notes, also by visiting sjlincoln.com/video. Again, that is sjlincoln.com/video. Great for people that are looking for something practical to kind of wrap their arms around in terms of how do I acquire a rental property. That's it for the intro. Let's get into the episode. We'll start off today with a conversation around the recently passed New York State budget and specifically how it's going to impact real estate investors. Now, good cause eviction is something that's been kicking around for the past few years, essentially allowing for tenants to renew leases in perpetuity as long as they meet basic standards in terms of being current on rent, not being destructive to property, while at the same time capping rent increases at the lesser of 10% or 5% plus CPI. There are some nuances to it. Municipalities actually need to opt into this for it to take effect. No surprise, right out of the gate, Albany, number one. And surely we're going to see other cities in the capital region follow suit. For the neutral out there, you might be saying, well, Steve, this doesn't sound so bad. If a tenant isn't being naughty, how could you ever look to remove them or look to increase rent by more than 10%? There are a lot of parents that watch and listen to this program who might be familiar with the story, if you give a mouse a cookie. And for those who aren't, I'll give you the premise. If a hungry mouse knocks on your door and says, can you please give me a cookie? Next thing you know, they're going to be asking for a glass of milk. And after you give them a glass of milk, they're going to be looking to wash their face. Then they want to lie down to take a nap. Next thing you know, you're living with a mouse. And that's what really is happening here. If you give a little bit, overwhelmingly, they're going to be looking to take more. And how do we know they're going to be looking to take more? Because the people responsible for this legislation, that's exactly what they're telling us. This is a quote from Manhattan Assembly member Tony Simone. Quote, "It's a start." So we know it's going to be the lesser of 10% or 5% plus CPI right now. Wait till it comes around for next year or the next time we need to negotiate a budget. You can look for them to kind of chip away at that. So that's from a real estate investor perspective. That's why we get nervous about things like that, because obviously we're not going around raising rent 10% on everybody every single year. But the moment you implement something like this, it's kind of like the snowball effect, right? It kind of picks up steam and it's a bit worrisome. So let's talk about unintended consequences here. Owners are going to be looking to invest less in their properties, knowing that their upside is going to be capped, right? We can only invest so much if we know that rents can only go up so much to compensate us for what we're looking to invest. That is also going to make properties in New York State less attractive, because if there's limits on how much we can increase rents, people looking to invest in real estate are going to go elsewhere, right? So that's going to put downward pressure on prices when you have less people interested in buying something, downward pressure on prices, which ultimately is going to hurt municipal coffers, because when assessment values go down, that's less for them to collect. So that's less funding for schools, roads, libraries, things like that. So what can we actually do here? What we do know is that these types of policies 100% do not increase the amount of inventory. And if you've listened to this program in the past, the one thing we harp on over and over is if you're looking to fix the housing shortage, which is local here in the capital region, it's statewide, and it's countrywide. We do not have enough housing here. So with policies like this, not only is it not increasing housing, but in a lot of ways it's scaring people away from wanting to create housing. How do we do it? Well, we need to reduce red tape on new construction, eliminate restrictive zoning, encourage people to enter the trades. Essentially what I'm getting at is we need to allow the free market to go to work. Next up, the return of zombie mortgages. But first, a quick word from today's show sponsor, SJ Lincoln Realty, helping home buyers and sellers throughout the capital region. I've been a real estate investor for over a decade and work here as the licensed real estate broker. If you or somebody important to you has a real estate related need in the capital region, let's connect. Stephen at sjlincoln.com is my email address, goes directly to me, or you can visit sjlincoln.com/book a call. And on the website, you're able to schedule a phone or a Zoom conversation with myself. Again, that's going to be Stephen at sjlincoln.com. sjlincolnrealty.com or sjlincoln.com/book-a-call. That's it. Let's get back to the show. From legislation that never should have been allowed to live, we'll now pivot to mortgage debt coming back to life. NPR recently put out an article discussing a recent rise in zombie mortgages. Now, zombie mortgages are probably a term you've heard of. You might not know exactly what it is. Essentially, it's mortgage debt that the homeowner thinks was either paid off or forgiven many years ago. And then out of the blue, you start getting calls, letters, people knocking on your door looking to collect the debt. It's stressful because overwhelmingly we're not talking about small dollar amounts here, because not only is there a principal amount that needs to be repaid, but if this was 5-10 years ago, we're talking a whole lot of interest. We're talking late fees. And if the lender has sent it to attorneys, there's going to be attorneys' fees they're going to be going after. So a lot of times these are large dollar amounts that the lender is looking to collect on. And to make the situation even worse for homeowners, a lot of times, overwhelmingly, the person looking to collect the debt is not the original lender who you took out the loan with. So you might have taken out a home equity line of credit with your local mortgage broker 15 years ago, and maybe you went through a tough point at some time, and you had conversation with the lender. We're just going to forgive it, or just refinance it into this other debt. For whatever reason, you thought a certain portion of the debt was going to be forgiven. It doesn't happen. That debt was then resold. Probably not once, probably multiple times over, and the debt holder at this point probably paid pennies on the dollar for the debt. They're now knocking on your door looking to collect $75,000 on a 15-year-old mortgage debt. So it's especially confusing for homeowners because the person looking to collect is not the original loan originator that they had conversations with, and they certainly don't know the company that this person works for either. So it's a stressful time. If you do happen to find yourself in a situation like this, there are some proactive steps you can take. First and foremost, whoever you're calling or whoever's calling you, ask them to send you copies of all of the original mortgage documents. So not just the recorded mortgage, because anyone can have access to that. Essentially what we're looking to do is we're looking to verify the debt. So not only do we want a copy of the mortgage, that's not special, anyone can pull that, but we want a copy of the note. We want a copy of anything that you had signed at time of origination, while also we're asking for all of the mortgage assignments that allow this company to collect the debt. So if you originated a loan at, let's say, Bank of America, but now Main Street 123 LLC is trying to collect on you, well, you want to make sure that at some point 123 Main Street LLC was assigned the debt, that they have the legal ability to collect the debt, because the last thing we want is for you to get scared into paying a lender debt, but they didn't actually have the legal authority to collect. So we're looking for copies of all of your original loan documents, while at the same time we want to verify that they have the legal authority to collect. So we're looking for mortgage assignments. You're going to want to hire a real estate attorney overwhelmingly to help you with this process. And if it turns out that they do in fact have a legal ability to collect this debt, the real estate attorney would probably be a good person to lean on to help negotiate the actual amount that's going to be owed. Because at the end of the day, they might be looking for $75,000, but if they only paid $5,000 for the debt, you might be able to negotiate that down a little bit. When buying a house, should you be stressed about potentially inheriting a zombie mortgage? Yes, but no. And the reason I say that is because it is a concern that if the current homeowner doesn't know that there's a debt out there, potentially it could attempt to be passed along to you. However, certainly in the state of New York, as part of the home buying process, your attorney, when they're representing you on the purchase, is going to be reviewing the title of the property. And that's going to outline what debts are on there. So it might be, your existing mortgage. It could be if you at some point fail to pay a handyman, right, and they put a lien on your property. When you're purchasing a property, your attorney, so you as the buyer, is going to research the title of the property to make sure that there's no mysterious liens out there. So even if there was a mortgage from, zombie mortgage, right, from 15 years ago, at this point, your attorney would flag it and say, this is a debt that needs to be repaid. So if there was, again, $75,000, that's $75,000 less that the seller is going to be receiving at time of closing. Instead, it's going to go pay off that lender. So, yeah, you want to be on the lookout to make sure all debts are being cleared out at time of closing. But as long as you have a good real estate attorney that's going to be researching to make sure that there's no mystery debts out there, you should be in good shape. And finally, if you're thinking, this sounds like a really interesting business model, this is something I want to get into. Well, you should have met me 10 years ago, because this is very similar to the type of work I was in. I worked for a real estate fund that very similar, purchased non-performing debt. However, our focus was more on vacant land versus residential real estate. However, there actually is a market out there. So for folks interested in exploring non-performing notes, whether it's, again, vacant land, commercial debt, residential real estate, could be first position, could be second position, whatever you're looking for, there's a market out there. No surprise, right? 2024, if you're looking to do something, there's probably someone that would be able to help you do it. So yeah, again, if you're looking to get into real estate, you're looking at different avenues. You don't want to be an investment property owner. You could look at buying notes, because that's going to be a bit more hands-off, right? Not so much day-to-day, but would still give you exposure to real estate. And finally, we'll wrap up today with a bit of a story time with Steve. I know people love real-world examples, so I'll give you something I ran into recently, and hopefully you'll be able to get something from it. A family had reached out to me a few months back, hoping I could find a buyer for a property of theirs that's been in the family for decades and decades. Unfortunately, the last person to live there was a bit of a hoarder, just boxes upon boxes, personal belongings everywhere. Couldn't really navigate from room to room. And sure enough, when you walk in the front door, you just get smacked in the face with just these horrible smells. It was going to be a tricky sell, and I think the family knew that too. So I said, all right, let me reach out to my investor network. Ideally, this is going to be perfect for someone that's looking to come in, renovate the property, quite extensively. So let me reach out to my investor network. So at the local Real Estate Investors Association meetup, I got up and said, hey, this is the property I've available, such and such number of bedrooms in this location. If you're interested, come find me after the meetup. And sure enough, people were interested. So I had a couple conversations. One gentleman I spoke with actually works as a wholesaler, and this is something we can discuss. I don't think we've touched on what wholesalers do on this podcast before, but a wholesaler essentially finds people interested in selling their properties and pairs them with people looking to buy them, and essentially takes a cut. So a wholesaler might negotiate with a someone interested in selling their home, say, hey, I'd be willing to pay you, $50,000 for this house. They get it under contract, and then they go out to folks they know who are interested in buying properties, and they say, hey, I have this property under contract. I can sell it to you for $75,000. They say, great. The seller gets out of the property that they no longer want. The buyer gets a property that they can do with it whatever they want, and the wholesaler gets the spread in the middle, right? So that's how wholesalers work. So I connected. One of the gentlemen that came up to me after the meeting was a wholesaler. He said, I have someone that would be perfect for this property. I said, wonderful, great. I'd be happy to compensate you if this gentleman ends up buying the property. He said, wonderful, great. So sure enough, this guy comes towards the property. We went back and forth for a couple days on pricing, and he ended up buying the property. And part of his negotiation was, hey, I'm gonna buy it for this amount, and whatever you're paying wholesaler Joe, we'll call him, I'm going to take care of Joe. So you don't need to worry about compensating Joe. I got it. I said, well, that's very attractive for me. The family was happy with the price. I'm happy because I don't have to go pay wholesaler Joe anything, right? So it seems like a win-win. So sure enough, he buys the property. Everyone's happy. Everyone had a great time. A couple weeks later, I get a phone call from wholesaler Joe. He said, hey, Steve, just reaching out to see when you'd be sending those funds over my way. I said, well, Joe, I think you got compensated by, buyer Mike, we'll call him, right? He said, yeah, buyer Mike did, give me some money for the transaction. I have a pre-existing relationship with Mike, and he pays me every lead I bring him. He pays me. So yeah, I did get paid by Mike, but you had told me once the deal closes, you would be paying me. I would expect you to live up to that. Yikes. So we have a bit of a problem on our hands, because wholesaler Joe now thinks he's getting basically, paid by the buyer, paid by me, which, to be fair, I told him I would be paying him. And I didn't really know what to do. So if my first thought was, well, he's trying to, collect from me. He's already gotten paid. My first thought was, well, let's go tell this guy to fly a kite, right? He's already gotten paid. He doesn't need to get paid by me too. But I let it sink in a little bit. Just kind of let it thought. I said, let me reach out to the buyer, because the buyer in this case was someone that has a lot more experience in real estate than I do. They're an older gentleman. They've been doing it for a while. Let me get their opinion on this. So I reached out to him and I explained to him the situation. And he was pretty quick with his response. He said, in all the years I've been in real estate, I've never run into a situation where, $500 was worth terminating a relationship, right? Because if you're going to be in any type of field, whether it's real estate or, whatever field you work in, you're going to be in it for a long time, and relationships are going to mean an awful lot. So if the wholesaler, is looking to get paid, $1,000, $500, whatever it is, you're probably better off just paying him and learn from the experience. So I thought about that, and it made a lot of sense, right? This is whether or not I end up doing business with this person again, whether it's the buyer or the wholesaler. I think you want to bend over backwards to make sure people you do business with leave the transaction with a positive taste in their mouth. And this would have been a great example of something that, we're not talking tens of thousands of dollars, right? I could have made the situation right. So, I called up the wholesaler and I said, yep, there are ways I could have handled this a lot better. And, so I promised you money. I'm going to get you money. So sure enough, I cut him a check. Where are the avenues where this went wrong, though? Because there are a lot of room for improvement. And obviously, I wasn't happy having to cut a check, right? I want all the money for myself. But, how do we learn? How do we learn from this? Well, first and foremost, what I didn't do was get everything in writing. And that would have solved everything if I had just gotten everything in writing up front. So who's going to be compensated what? Because, again, this isn't a standard real estate transaction. This is more of, hey, the family needs to find a buyer for this, not a junky property, but a property that had been run down. And here's an investor that wants to buy it. So it's not a traditional listing, yada, yada. So it's a little bit more loosey-goosey than you would typically see in a real estate sale. But that doesn't excuse the fact that it would have been a lot cleaner if I had just gotten everything in writing. So I think that certainly applies to any transactions you're doing in real estate. But again, whatever field you're in, if you're doing business with people, the more you can get in writing, the better. So I think going forward, that's certainly room for improvement there. But also, at the same time, you want to make sure that you're not getting taken advantage of. So get everything in writing for sure. But if you happen to be in a real estate transaction where you're working with a wholesaler that's trying to double end the deal, which is what he tried to do, sure, you can compensate him one time, but in the future, maybe you don't reach out to that wholesaler. Maybe you keep the cell phone and the email address for the buyer and just reach out to that buyer directly in the future. Just a thought. That's it for today. Hope you got something out of this. My email address is steven@sjlincoln.com. sjlincoln.com/book-a-call is the website address if you want to schedule something with me. Again, if you want to do a little bit more research on what it's like to own rental properties, check out the show notes. Again, it's about a 30-minute explainer on analyzing properties, looking at different areas, grant programs if you happen to be someone that's a first-time home buyer. So I think that would be a good start for you. Again, it's pretty practical. It's kind of like a step-by-step on how you do it. Again, Steven@sjlincoln.com, sjlincoln.com/book-a-call. Thanks for watching, and we'll talk again soon.